a biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Now, hot in the news cycle right now is the name of Charlie Kirk, the conservative Christian commentator from the United States, whose way in debate won the hearts of many on the internet, but whose tragic assassination last week has broken the hearts of many more. Stephen McAlpine is an award-winning Christian author, pastor, and consultant for churches and Christian schools, and he's back with us right now to share his raw and honest thoughts coming from this world-shaking event. Welcome back to 2020, Stephen McAlpine.
Thanks, Tosh. Good to be with you.
It's great to have you with us, mate. A couple of weeks ago when we had you here on 2020, we wouldn't have thought it would be with such headlines. But what do you make of the recent turn of events, mate?
Yeah, well, it feels like, as Winston Churchill said, what changes things? He was asked, and he said, events, dear boy, events. And it feels like events last week have changed things a lot. I woke up because to go out for a run, and a friend from England had texted me, do you know Charlie Kirk? And I went, of course. And then went on with my day. And then suddenly I saw that he'd been shot. And it just struck me at a time that I thought, oh, my goodness, this is going to be bigger than people think. And part of it was because I think there was an older generation that perhaps didn't know much about him, even in Australia. But every young person I know had heard of him, even if they didn't agree with him. And so I saw old media saying, we don't even know who this guy is. And I saw young people saying, you're kidding. And I think that's what the shock was. It was such a global figure at this time.
Yeah, and the change and the events that change things, there's been a slow creep in academia. There's been a changing of the guard in the philosophical drives behind a lot of academic institutions. And in your article, one of your recent articles on your website, Stephen, you've put up there about how these once Christian and God-fearing institutions have now become breeding grounds for something very different, some hostility coming into that place like has never been seen before. Could you give us your thoughts around that for our Vision family?
Yeah, what I'd be saying there is that many of the institutions that were birthed in a Christian framework have come adrift from the Christian underpinnings that they have, so that the institutions themselves espouse things that I think are contrary to the gospel. Now, I don't need every institution to be completely Christian, but the framework for free speech, freedom of conscience, etc., did not come out of nowhere. And Tom Holland, in his book Dominion, writes that the free speech framework we have, the freedom of conscience, the freedom of association, was birthed from a Christian frame in the world. And when you lose that, you start to get things where people say, well, words are actual violence. So if that's true, then we can do actual violence to stop words. And that's what Brendan O'Neill, who writes for Spiked, he's a journalist, he's not a Christian, but quite a few years ago he said, we're in a situation where if you equate what someone says, that's violence, then you can actually do violence to them. That's not a long bow to draw. And that's exactly what we saw with Charlie Kirk's murder. And the problem of it was that it was in 4K camera. And so the violence has got an image to it that's very strong. There's no one who's seen the murder of Martin Luther rarely anyway, but it's all over the internet, this one, and it feels like something has shifted in the culture at the moment.
In the rise of this violence that's coming out right now, how, as a Christian commentator, as a Christian thinker, how would you think that the Christian should respond in such pressured times?
Well, not with violence, though. I guess.
Well said.
Yeah. The hard thing is we all want to be more pious than Jesus, because we all go, well, love your neighbour. But Jesus said, love your enemy, because that's the gospel. Love your neighbour is the law. Love your enemy is the gospel. That doesn't mean to say you should give latitude for people to do things that are violent, but it does mean to say that the restraining hand of the gospel says you must love your enemy. And that's gone, I think, particularly from a post-Christian hard left perspective. Now, it's not to say that the right doesn't also do that, but I think the Christian worldview was the temper in the ancient world that stopped you. If someone shamed you, you'd kill their village. The vengeance is mine thing, saith the Lord, is absolutely critical, because we took God out of the picture and we just outsourced vengeance to ourselves. And I think that's the problem.
And decoupling our morality from the bed of Scripture, it really cuts away a linkage to anything firm. It places as a society, our thinking in the most shallow area of feelings rather than the highest esteem of morality. And so going into that concept, what do you mean in your article, Charlie Kirk is dead and I am sad, by introducing the concept of therapeutized Marxism? Yes,
I think there's a framework in the world that post the Marxist experiment in the state, as in economic Marxism, the picture now is, well, we make it into a psychological thing, that everyone is either a victim or an oppressor. It's ironically very binary in our culture. You're either a victim or you're an oppressor. And if the things that you say against me are bad, then I'm the victim and you're the oppressor. But we always see ourselves, and I think the left particularly does this, as the victim. The problem with the Bible is that the Bible says that we're both perpetrators of bad yes. and victims of bad. And it's the Solzhenitsyn line, that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart. And we have started to forget that at the moment. And the left in particular has become very zealous about those issues, to the point that they even burn their own people if they stand up and say, well, I don't agree with Charlie Kirk, but we shouldn't have killed him. And you see people come online saying he got what he deserved. I think that was terrible.
Absolutely, Talbot. It's quite interesting that you used the word binary system, coming from the left, who love to espouse in other areas of their thinking and philosophy about being non-binary. It's selective wisdom, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's very strongly like that. And I wanted to separate two groups of people on the left. There's the liberal left, which are much more versed in the Christian framework, and there's a hard progressive left which has jettisoned it. And perhaps one of the best speeches to come out of what's happened over the last few days from the left has been from Bernie Sanders. And he's obviously, he's the whipping boy for many conservatives, but he was very straightforward in what he said. And I thought there was something in that. And he's not the same progressive left that sort of jettisoned the framework of I guess the modern society and the deals we do with each other so that we can live with our differences. He's a very different person to what is being bred now, I think.
And what were those comments from Bernie Sanders, obviously, who was an important person in the Democrat in a couple of election cycles ago?
Yeah, well, Bernie Sanders was saying this is a horrendous event and this should never happen. This is a democracy in America where ideas have made us the people we are, and conversations across the floor have given us the strength we've got. And we cannot go down this line. And I think that's the guts of it, that at the guts of the American experiment, if you like, has been, we don't have to slaughter each other like Europe did. Because don't forget, Europe looks at America and goes, look how bad you are with all your guns. And there's perhaps some truth to that. But America started because Europeans couldn't live at peace with each other. They kept slaughtering each other.
Very true.
And so it's go right back at you, Europe. You're the problem in the first place. And so America started it with its ideals. Now, its ideals said at the start, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. But those truths aren't self-evident. They're biblical. And so when you take the biblical framework out of it, you don't have a self-evidence that all humans are created equal. And once you lose that, you can dehumanize your enemy.
And it's like a boat that's resting at anchor. If you cut the anchor, then it's the tides that are pressing in the moment that determine the motion of the vessel, rather than the anchor that gives you the choice to settle yourself. And how do you see... Oh, go ahead.
No, it's exactly the metaphor that Tom Holland used about the historian Tom Holland said about the West, that it's still firmly tied to its Christian moorings. But I would think over the last few years, the rope got cut And it is doing exactly what you said. It's drifting.
Yeah, and it's the pressures of the moment that seem to be the forces that are pushing. Someone comes in, as you used before, the language of polarization. Well, I'm a victim of you, I'm a victim of you. And it tends to make people who didn't realize that they were oppressors while they were living their 9 to 5 and paying their taxes and going to church and taking the kids to sport, when they were doing their everyday life, all of a sudden they're being framed as oppressors now. I better not speak up against this person who I seem to be oppressing. It has a quieting effect on the everyday person.
Well, I think that's part of the problem, is that when you damp down conversation about things, or you say, here are 5 things you're not allowed to talk about, what do you think they're going to go away, those 5 things? You're seeing the result of that in the West at the moment. Huge turmoil about what we can and can't say. And it's a bit like a young child trying to stop the water coming out of, a fire hydrant. You can't hold the pressure down forever. It's got to come out. And it will either come out in healthy ways or it'll come out in ways that are very unhealthy.
Yeah, that unhealthy way of the pressure coming out, of the water coming out, to use your analogy, I mean, you can sort of see that in the framing of how media is speaking about Charlie Kirk now, which is obviously mainstream media is quite left-leaning. It's using the word divisive about Charlie Kirk. What do you think about the media's term in labelling him that way? Do you think he was divisive? Do you think that's a fair term?
Look, Charlie Kirk was 31, and I want to say to most people, what were you like at 31? Here's a man who goes to a university, colleges, and he did this from 2 or 3 years ago, and he was maybe 6 years older than some of the students, and it felt like the difference between a man and a boy speaking, that the divisiveness that I saw coming the other way. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with divisive, but they're using it as a pejorative term and saying, true, and our side is not divisive. And that's just not true. What you could say is, well, you don't mind division when it comes from your perspective. But if you're so binary in your understanding of humans, that's a huge divide in and of itself. So I saw a lot of the language used about him in mainstream media as a way to subtly go, well, maybe he deserved it. And that was more than said on some television stations. Well, he brought this on himself with his inflammatory language. And then a lot of people had to backtrack when they actually went and looked at what he did say in context. And that was what probably troubled me more than anything, is that there was a certain glee among very hard progressive left, and then there was a certain dismissiveness among the mainstream media. And that's part of the reason why the new medias are actually the places where most of the conversations are going to be had around this issue. The mainstream media kind of dropped the ball on this one.
It reminds me of a saying by C.H. Spurgeon years ago: bold-hearted men are always called mean-spirited by cowards. It's sort of... It's
so true. And one of the things I've learned in the public square, because I have a little bit of a public profile, not that much, certainly not Charlie Kirk's, was that it feels very lonely when you say stuff that you think, I need to say this, and there'll be a whole bunch of people who hate on me, and and they'll do it publicly, and there'll be a whole bunch of people who love me, and they'll do it privately.
Yeah.
And so that is always the hardest thing in this space. And I think Charlie Kirk had both sides. I don't agree with all of his politics, I'm going to be honest with you. But there was something about the way and Bishop Robert Barron, who's a great Catholic commentator in the United States, said this: Charlie Kirk died with a microphone in his hand, not a gun. And that's the difference.
Yeah, it's historically, if you go back across all great civilizations, you find essentially that the use of violence in the space of argument, it's always a very last-ditch effort from people who know that they're lost the idea and the war of the words. And bringing out another article that you wrote, I Blame the Parents, an article there about some of the wash that has come out of this time after the death of Charlie Kirk, and especially his relationship with Oxford Union. For those who are listening in around Australia who might not know what the Oxford Union is and Charlie Kirk's connection there, can you fill in the blanks a little for us there, Stephen?
Well, the Oxford Union is, like every university's got a union and, 50 people vote for the president, but the Oxford Union is different. It's a debating place. There's a president and there's the Oxford Union itself has got its own voted on students, but they debate at high level. And the head of the Oxford Union, who's the president-elect, has debated Charlie Kirk back in July. Didn't do a great job of it, I have to say, because Charlie was firm with him, but really put him in his place, I think. And when he was shot, the president-elect of the Oxford Union posts gleeful emojis and a couple of swear words and gloats over it. And people often say, well, if you can look at the eyes of the person who you're arguing with rather than see them over a screen, you'll humanise them. Not him, not at all. Yeah. And he doubled down. Now, people say, well, he shouldn't get cancelled for his opinions. But I would say this, if you want to be the head of the Oxford Union and you want to debate people, it's a bit like boxing. The Queensberry rules of boxing say these are the rules of engagement. And if you step outside those rules or you espouse a way of behaving that steps outside those rules, then the rules might just come back and bite you. And the rules at the moment are that there is a huge load of signatories to call for for him to be stood down. And so part of the issue is we don't live in a world where even humanising someone eyeball to eyeball does not stop someone gloating over your death. And that's a cold, bitter world.
You don't get to stand for an institution that prides itself on the morality of free speech and then self-indulge in some sort of gleefulness over your intellectual enemy or intellectual sparring partner going down. It seems quite antithetical to the foundations of the Oxford Union.
Well, this isn't a surprise because the very man who did it has said earlier in another speech that some institutions just need to be burned down and destroyed because they're past the point. And he meant on the right, institutions on the right, presumably not Oxford Union because he thinks it's on his side. And therein lies the problem. Oxford University is built on a framework of discourse that's built by the gospel. It's a Christian institution originally, and now there are people who are squatting on land that they did not purchase. And that's my problem. Now, a mini revival happening in some of the churches in Oxford over the last 6 months to 12 months.
Wow.
People are noticing. Who knows what happens because of this?
And Stephen, in your article, I Blame the Parents, the core of that's really saying the intellectual parents who are creating the think space that these characters are growing within. We've got a couple of minutes left. Would you speak to that concept of blaming these parents, quote unquote?
Yeah, look, when I wrote the provocative title, people think, does he really mean the parents? No, I mean the intellectual structures of the post-Christian humanities departments, which have bought into that cultural Marxist framework of polarizing oppressor and oppressed, and that there are certain people who can never be right because of their skin color or their nationality or their colonial or whatever. And so you get this narrative, the very binary thing, which has nothing to do with how the institutions were birthed. But the intellectual parents are going, oh, it's okay, we understand this. And then when they see something like this happen, they don't know how to respond. Though that's not always true, because you also see professors and teachers and doctors and lawyers celebrating this. This event has shown me that good education isn't the stepping stone to morality. That's the problem. It's that very well-heeled, well-versed people celebrated this, and that's the intellectual parent problem.
And it's morality seems to be the foundation of morality, right?
That's right. And it's what it's doing in one sense is saying, how about we build a society on these foundations rather than these other foundations? And the proof is in the pudding. The proof of the pudding's in the eating, right? You're not going to see a society built up on those foundations.
Stephen McAlpine, thank you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts around this volatile subject.
Look, thank you. It is volatile, and I feel it's got some traction to go in the coming weeks, but it's sorrowful, and we must not let our anger spill over into desires for vengeance.
It's wonderful, mate. Thanks again for all your thoughts here on that. And if you want to follow up Stephen, he's at stephenmcalpine.com.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.